The whole town told him to walk away, and now he understands why. A struggling veteran took in a lost girl carrying her newborn sister, hoping to give them shelter from the winter cold. But when his German shepherd began growling at the walls of the old wooden house he just inherited, they uncovered a hidden space sealed behind a panel. And inside it, something left behind by a woman who vanished years ago. What they found would unravel a family's darkest secrets and rewrite all their lives. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. Drop your city, state, or country in the comments below. Stories travel farther than we ever imagine. Winter pressed hard against Minneapolis. The sky, low and heavy as snow, drifted like pale ash across frozen streets. Ethan Miller walked through it with the familiar stiffness of a man who had carried too much weight for too many years. At 37, Ethan had the frame of someone who used to be stronger, broad-shouldered, but worn down, his posture slightly bent as if memories still clung to his spine. His face was angular, sharp at the jaw, softened only by a thin layer of stubble. He never bothered shaving clean. Faint scars marked his cheek and temple from shrapnel, long-ago lines that caught the winter light like silver threads. His eyes, a muted gray-blue, carried that distant look soldiers often kept, even after they stopped wearing uniforms, the look of someone who had learned to listen for danger even in silence. A beige beanie pulled low over his forehead was his only real attempt at warmth as he trudged through the snow. Beside him walked Max, his 4-year-old German shepherd. Max was powerfully built with thick winter fur striking black and tan markings and ears that never relaxed. His gait was alert, controlled the walk of a trained military working dog who had once learned to track explosives and read human fear like scent. Yet his eyes, deep brown and endlessly loyal, softened whenever they rose to check on Ethan, as if reminding him that not everything in life was meant to be scanned for threats. Ethan lived in a small apartment on the outskirts of Minneapolis, a place with thin walls and a heater that complained more than it worked. The nights were the hardest. Sleep never came without fragments of the desert bursts of heat, the sound of metal tearing through silence. Some nights he woke with his breath trapped in his throat, and Max would already be there with a steady head pressed against his chest. Those were the only moments Ethan felt anchored to the present, instead of pulled backward into memories he wanted to forget. Outside the garage where he worked nights, the wind whipped flakes of snow into spirals that danced under the flickering streetlights. Ethan finished a long shift repairing a faulty transmission, wiping grease from his hands with a rag stiff from cold. His boss, a gruff man named Carl who talked too loudly and cared too little, had left hours earlier, tossing Ethan the keys and muttering something about locking up whenever. Silence had settled over the garage like dust. When Ethan stepped outside, Max nudged his hand gently with a cold nose, as if sensing the exhaustion beneath his jacket. Yeah, I know," Ethan murmured, rubbing behind the dog's ears. "I'm getting old." His breath curled into the air like smoke fading before it rose too high. Minneapolis always felt harsher in winter, but tonight the cold seemed to seep deeper than usual, sinking into bones already tired of carrying themselves from day to day. On his walk home, snow deepened around his boots, and the hum of distant traffic faded into a muffled hush. The glow of street lamps cast a dim, honey-colored haze over the sidewalks, giving even the empty streets a softness. When Ethan reached his building, a narrow brick complex squeezed between a laundromat and a corner store, he noticed the envelope immediately. It was perched on the mat outside his apartment door, speckled with melted snow. His name, Ethan Miller, was typed neatly across the front. No return address. Max sniffed the air and growled, just a soft rumble, but enough to make Ethan frown. "Relax," he muttered. "Probably a bill." But when he opened it inside, shaking snow from his coat, he realized it was something else entirely. The letter inside was crisp, cream-colored, and formal. "Mr. Miller, we regret to inform you of the passing of your Aunt Margaret Collins." Ethan stopped reading. Margaret Collins. He barely remembered her, only a faint childhood memory of a tall woman with auburn hair tied in a bun wearing sweaters that smelled like cinnamon and old books. His mother used to call her the quiet sister, the one who vanished into small towns whenever life became too loud. The letter continued explaining legal matters in cold, practice sentences. He was the sole beneficiary of a property she left behind, a small wooden house near the historic district of Minneapolis. A house he didn't know existed. Max, sprawled at Ethan's feet, had tilted, sensing the shift in his breathing. Ethan lowered the paper slowly, staring at it with a mixture of disbelief and unease. He wasn't the type to inherit anything. His life up to now had been earned with sweat muscle and nights he didn't want to talk about. "A house, huh?" he said under his breath. "We can barely afford takeout, and somehow we've got a house." Max wagged his tail once uncertain. Ethan looked around his apartment, the peeling paint, the shaky heater, the window that refused to close fully since last winter. Maybe this house could be something. Or maybe it was another responsibility he didn't ask for. He sat heavily on the old couch letters still in hand. His thoughts flickered like the broken lamp in the corner memories, worries, the sense of being pulled into something unfamiliar. Part of him wanted to ignore the letter, let whatever this house was rot quietly under the snow. But another part, the part shaped by years of surviving what should have broken him, felt a pull he couldn't quite explain. A chance, a shift, a place where something might be different. Max nudged his knee again, insistent this time. Ethan sighed. "What do you think, boy? Should we check it out?" Max barked once, sharp and decisive. Ethan huffed a small laugh. "Right. Of course you'd say that." He imagined the house old, creaky, filled with forgotten furniture and the ghosts of people he barely remembered. But beneath that, something like curiosity stirred a thin spark he hadn't felt in years. Maybe the house wasn't just a relic of the past. Maybe it was an invitation. A gentle knock from life saying, "Try again." He folded the letter and slipped it into his jacket pocket. Outside, wind howled down the empty street. Max lifted his head ears, pricked. Ethan glanced toward the frosted window and whispered, half joking, half serious, "If that place has ghosts, you're doing the barking. I'll handle the running." Max's tail thumped in response, and Ethan felt the faintest tug of a smile. Somewhere under the cold weight of winter, something had begun to shift. And tomorrow he and Max would step into whatever waited for them on the other side of that inheritance. The snowstorm thickened until the world outside Ethan's windshield blurred into a white curtain erasing the road, the buildings, even the horizon itself. He could barely see 10 feet ahead, and the wind screeched across the hood of his truck like an animal desperate to claw inside. Max sat upright in the passenger seat, muscles tense beneath his thick winter coat, his breath fogging the glass as he watched the swirling snow with that hyper-alert focus only trained dogs carried. Ethan felt the cold tightening in his gut, a familiar edge of danger, the same feeling he'd had on winter patrols overseas when the enemy hid in silence and the cold punished every breath. Minneapolis winters weren't battlefields, but storms always reminded him of nights he wished he could forget. When the stoplight ahead disappeared under the snowfall, Ethan pulled over beside a small bus shelter. The structure was barely holding together, its metal frame rattling every time a blast of wind hit its plexiglass sides, shaking as if the storm wanted to rip them from the bolts. He intended only to wait until visibility improved, but as soon as he stepped out, the sight under that trembling roof made him freeze. A girl no more than 11 or 12 sat curled on the bench, her thin body wrapped around a newborn baby. The girl's long brown hair was tied in a shaky ponytail, strands frozen stiff against her pale cheeks. Her coat was too thin, faded denim, patched with mismatched fabric, and her jeans were soaked from the snow. Her fingers, trembling with cold, clutched the bundled infant so tightly it looked as if she were trying to shield the baby from the entire world. Yet her eyes, wide, dark, and far too mature for her age, held a quiet defiance, the kind born from someone who had spent years enduring more than most adults could bear. Ethan approached slowly, afraid that sudden movement might frighten her. Max, however, moved with a gentleness Ethan rarely saw. The German shepherd lowered his head slightly, tail, relaxed posture, calm, emitting a small, soft woof that was more greeting than warning. The girl flinched at first, but relaxed when she saw Max's warm brown eyes. When Ethan reached the bench, snow already coating his shoulders and beanie, he crouched to her level. "Hey," he said gently, careful not to sound like he was interrogating her. "I'm Ethan. This is Max. Are you okay out here?" Her lips parted, breath fogging as she whispered, "My name is Lily, and this is my sister Ava." Ava, wrapped tightly in a thin blanket, had a tiny pink face peeking out, barely visible, barely moving except for the slight flutter of her chest. She looked too small, too fragile, as if a gust of cold wind alone might take her away. Ethan felt something twist inside him, something that yanked him decades back to a battlefield bunker where he'd once held a wounded boy 17, shaking, whispering for his mother. The memory hit him so hard he swallowed before he spoke again. "Where's your mom?" "Lily." Lily's eyes flicked toward the empty street. "She said she had to go get something. She told me to wait here. But she's been gone a while." Ethan glanced up the road as if expecting a figure to appear through the storm. No one did. The snow swallowed everything. Max stepped closer to Lily, gently nudging her leg with his nose. The girl smiled weakly. "He's friendly," she whispered. "He's trained," Ethan corrected softly. "He knows when someone needs help." Lily hugged Ava tighter when a gust of wind cut across the shelter, rattling the roof. Ethan saw how her arms shook not from fear, but from exhaustion, from the cold creeping deeper with each passing minute. "Lily," he said, shrugging off his jacket despite the cold sinking through his shirt, "instantly take this. And here, wrap this scarf around Ava." Lily tried to protest. "No, sir. You'll be cold. Then I'll just shake myself warm," Ethan said, forcing a crooked grin. "Works better than coffee." Lily giggled, for the first time a small, fragile sound that somehow made the storm feel less brutal. Ethan took a slow breath, thinking through the situation like he used to think through missions. 2 children, 1 infant, a missing mother, a snowstorm worsening by the minute. His mind moved through probabilities, risks, outcomes. Everything pointed to one conclusion. "Lily," he said, "you can't stay out here. No one should be in this weather, and Ava needs warmth fast. I'm heading to a house nearby, the one I inherited today. You can come with me, just until the storm passes." Lily's face tightened with hesitation. It wasn't distrust, it was fear. Not of him, but of making the wrong decision. She had the look of someone who had learned to be responsible long before childhood ended. "What if," she whispered, voice cracking, "what if Mom comes back and we're not here?" Ethan's heart pinched. "I'll leave a note," he said. "A big one. And we'll only be a few minutes away. If she comes back, she'll know where to find you." Lily searched his face as if trying to read the truth in the lines carved by war and years of loneliness. Finally, she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "Just until she comes back." Ethan stood and offered his hand. Lily took it with trembling fingers and rose slowly, careful not to jostle Ava. Max paced beside them like a guardian, ears swiveling at every sound. When they reached Ethan's truck, Lily hesitated again. "Is it safer than staying out here?" Ethan answered. "And Max will sit with you." That was enough. Inside the truck, Ethan cranked the heater, rubbing his hands together. Lily sat in the back seat, Ava resting against her chest. Max curled protectively beside her. When Ethan caught Lily staring at Ava's tiny face with an expression of fierce love mixed with fear, something inside him shifted, an old wound softening, a new purpose taking shape. He pulled away from the curb, tires slipping over snow. The wind roared, but inside the truck, with Max's steady breathing and the faint coo of Ava, the world felt a fraction safer. Lily's eyes fluttered, heavy with exhaustion. "Thank you," she murmured. Ethan didn't answer at first. He just drove through the storm, letting the heater thaw his frozen fingers and the presence of two fragile souls thaw something deeper inside his chest. And as he glanced at the letter still sticking out of his glove compartment, the inheritance he hadn't asked for, he realized this night was no accident. Something was pulling him forward toward that house, toward whatever waited there, toward a story he had not planned to step into. He whispered quietly, mostly to himself, "Hang on, Lily. We'll figure this out." Outside snow roared across the city, but inside the truck, for the first time in years, Ethan felt a faint sliver of purpose warming through the winter cold. Snow swallowed the city by the time Ethan pulled onto the quiet street where the inherited cabin waited. The headlights cut through swirling white just long enough to reveal the small wooden house tucked between bare maple trees, its roof heavy with fresh snow. The place looked older than he expected, like a relic clinging to winter with stubborn dignity. The porch sagged slightly at one corner, the railing chipped, the windows clouded from age. And yet in the faint yellow glow of the street lamp, the cabin felt strangely hopeful, the way forgotten things sometimes call out for one last chance. Ethan parked, stepped out into the biting cold, and opened the back door so Lily could climb down carefully with Ava tucked against her chest. Lily kept her chin low against the wind, her long brown hair whipping across her face. She looked smaller than she had under the bus shelter lights, thin shoulders, worn-out sneakers soaked through eyes shadowed by exhaustion. But she held Ava with a fierce protective instinct, arms wrapped like armor around her baby sister. Max jumped down next landing soundlessly, his paws sinking into the snow. The German Shepherd scanned the yard instantly, ears rotating as he took in the unfamiliar scents: wet earth, wood, rot, old dust, and something faintly sweet. His breath puffed out in clouds as he did a slow circular sweep tail, low but not tense. Ethan unlocked the door, and the hinges groaned in protest, opening into a darkness that smelled like memories sealed too long. He fumbled for the light switch and found only a dull bulb overhead, flickering weakly before settling into a dim, amber glow. The cabin's interior breathed out the scent of old pine boards, dust, and unexpectedly a lingering trace of cinnamon, as if someone had once baked Christmas cookies and the walls had absorbed the warmth. Ethan motioned Lily inside. The girl stepped in cautiously, her thin shoes squeaking on the wooden floor. She tightened her hold on Ava as Max trotted ahead, nails clicking against the boards. The house was small, a living room with sagging furniture, a narrow hallway, a tiny kitchen with peeling wallpaper of faded winter berries. A stone fireplace sat in the center of the living room, its interior cold but clean. Ethan knelt to check the ashes. "Looks like it's been a while," he murmured. Behind him, Lily hovered uncomfortably, unsure of whether she was allowed to sit or touch or breathe too loudly. Her eyes darted around, absorbing the unfamiliar space as though mapping an escape route. Ethan turned toward her. "You two okay?" Lily nodded, although her lip trembled slightly. "It's warmer than outside. That's the goal." Ethan grabbed a handful of kindling from a basket by the hearth. "Let's fix that fireplace." Max circled the room once more, his nose brushing the floorboards. Then he patted into the kitchen tail, swishing thoughtfully. Ethan struck a match and the flames licked up the dry wood. Warmth began to seep into the room, battling the winter chill that clung to their clothes. Lily sank to the floor near the fireplace, cradling Ava and rocking gently. The baby made a soft sound, half sigh, half whimper, before settling into sleep. Ethan watched Lily for a moment, noticing the deep shadows under her eyes, the way her breathing hitched now and then, as if holding back fear. This child had seen too much. He'd seen the same look on young soldiers thrown into war too early. He went into the kitchen and filled a pot with water. When he turned on the stove, the burners hissed, but eventually caught flame. "Hope you like gourmet meals," he called, pulling out instant noodles from the cupboard his aunt must have stocked years ago. "This was five-star cuisine where I come from." Lily gave him a puzzled look. "Where's that?" Ethan smiled softly. Where the sand never stops blowing and the nights get cold enough to bite. Where you learn to share food with people who might be gone the next day. Lily didn't fully understand, but she nodded solemnly, as if recognizing the heaviness beneath his words. While the noodles cooked, Ethan glanced around the kitchen. The cabinets were tall, painted mint green, but chipped at the corners. A framed photograph hung crookedly near the back door, a woman with auburn hair tied in a loose bun, his Aunt Margaret. She wore a warm smile, the kind that tried to hide loneliness. Ethan felt his throat tighten unexpectedly. A life cut away from him, and he hadn't even known. When the water boiled, he poured the noodles into 2 mismatched bowls and carried them into the living room. Lily leaned closer to the fire, letting her numb fingers thaw. Ava slept soundly, bundled in Ethan's scarf. "Eat," Ethan urged, gently handing her a bowl. "You need it." Lily hesitated. "Is it okay? I don't want to take your food." "Trust me," Ethan said dryly. "I'm not trying to impress anyone with my menu." Lily cracked a tiny smile. Max nudged her elbow before lying down his body, creating a warm barrier on her other side. After a few sips of broth, Lily's shoulders loosened. The fire crackled softly. Outside, the wind howled like something trying to claw its way in, but inside the cabin felt like a fragile sanctuary. When Lily finally spoke, her voice was whisper-thin. "We didn't mean to be outside that long." Ethan stayed quiet, letting her continue. "Mom, she said she needed to pick something up. She told me to sit and wait. She said she'd be right back." Lily's fingers tightened on the bowl. She didn't come back. Ethan felt anger rise, not toward the mother, not yet, but toward whatever had driven them into such a desperate moment. Did she say where she was going? "No," Lily whispered. "Only that she wouldn't be long. But sometimes she says that when she's scared. Scared of what Lily swallowed hard. Of my stepdad. His name is Mark. He yells a lot. He drinks. He hits walls, and other things." Ethan exhaled slowly. He'd met men like that in the army, men who crumbled under their own rage and dragged everyone down with them. "You're safe here," he said gently. "Both of you." Lily blinked rapidly, as though the words alone were enough to make her cry. Instead, she asked, "Will Max stay close tonight?" Max lifted his head as if answering for himself, then laid it gently on Lily's knee. Lily smiled faintly. "Okay," she whispered. Ethan set down his empty bowl and looked around the cabin. Something tugged at his senses, an odd stillness, like the house had been waiting for them. "This place isn't fancy," he said softly, "but it's got a roof and heat and a dog that snores." "That's a start," Lily giggled. "He snores like a chainsaw," Ethan said. "You'll see." The laughter faded into a calmer silence. Ava shifted in her sleep, letting out a tiny sigh. Lily yawned, exhaustion overtaking her. Ethan grabbed an old blanket from the couch, thick woolen smelling faintly of cedar, and draped it over her shoulders. As she drifted off beside the fire, Max curled protectively around both children. Ethan watched the flames flicker across the cabin walls, painting the room in warm gold. For the first time in years, he felt something shift inside him, a sense that maybe fate hadn't been punishing him with this inheritance but offering something unexpected. A purpose, a connection, a chance to rewrite the shape of his days. Outside, the blizzard raged on. Inside, under the fragile warmth of an old wooden home, Ethan quietly vowed that Lily and Ava would not have to face the storm alone again. Morning came slowly, pushing through a sky the color of steel, as Minneapolis lay frozen under another thick blanket of snow. The lake nearby had turned into a sheet of pale glass, and every rooftop along the narrow streets was dipped in frost. Ethan stepped outside with Max at his heel, the dog's breath steaming into the brittle air. Lily followed a moment later, bundled in one of Ethan's old winter jackets, the sleeves long enough to cover half her hands. She clutched Ava close to her chest, the infant wrapped tightly in layers of blankets. Lily's expression held a fragile strength, the kind born from a night of warmth after days of fear, but beneath it was worry sharp and constant, etched in the way her brows pinched together. Ethan locked the cabin door behind them, feeling the weight of the day ahead pushing into his shoulders just like the winter cold. He had woken early, listening to the quiet breaths of the girls sleeping near the fire, while he sat awake running scenarios through his mind the same way he used to plan missions. Finding their mother would not be simple, but he owed them this. Max walked with an alert, measured stride, his posture shifting with every passerby they encountered. The dog's deep brown eyes narrowed whenever someone called out too loudly on the sidewalk or approached too quickly. Ethan held the leash firmly, understanding how much Max reflected his own instincts. Trauma didn't always heal, it simply changed shape. Their first stop was the local police station. Inside, the harsh fluorescent lights cast a pale glow on linoleum floors and bulletin boards cluttered with missing person notices and community postings. Behind the front desk stood Officer Daniel Harper, a man in his mid-40s with a square jaw shadowed by a day's worth of stubble and tired hazel eyes that hinted at years of night shifts and dealing with the public at their worst. His uniform fit neatly, but his posture slouched slightly, as if he had learned to brace for whatever news came next. "What can I help you with?" Harper asked, his voice unexpectedly gentle when he noticed Lily. Ethan explained the situation, Emily, missing the storm, Lily, waiting at the bus stop. Harper typed notes slowly, reading each detail back to confirm accuracy. "We've got reports of a woman matching that description," he said after a moment. "Visited shelters earlier this week, likely on the move to avoid someone." He didn't say who. He didn't need to. The tension in Lily's shoulders said everything. Their next stop was a women's support center. The building was warm, soft-lit, and painted in calming shades of beige and lavender. Volunteers walked through the hallways carrying blankets, clipboards, and warm drinks. A lady named Marjorie greeted them, an older woman with silver curls pinned in place, kind brown eyes behind round glasses, and a steady motherly presence. She wore a knitted cardigan decorated with small embroidered flowers. "A missing young mother?" she asked, voice gentle. "Let's take a look at our logs." She brought out a binder filled with intake notes. Her fingers moved slowly, carefully, like someone used to handling delicate things. "Emily." "Yes." She tapped a line with a freshly manicured nail. "She came by 3 days ago. Seemed frightened. Didn't stay long." Marjorie's expression softened as she studied Lily. "You look just like her," she murmured. Lily swallowed hard. Ethan thanked her and left with a new direction in mind, a small church noted beside the record. As they walked, memories Ethan had buried beneath years of exhaustion and silence began to push their way to the surface. He remembered Corporal Jensen, a kid barely 20, the youngest in their unit. Jensen had always been the one cracking jokes, talking about his dreams of opening a small fishing shop in Oregon. Until one night in the desert, a warning sign missed a shout, ignored an explosion that tore through the sand. Ethan had held Jensen's hand while his life bled into the dirt. If someone had spoken up sooner, acted faster, maybe the boy would still be here. Maybe guilt wouldn't be etched so deeply into Ethan's bones. He felt it again now, that same urgency, that same gnawing fear of arriving too late. He glanced at Lily walking bravely despite her trembling and knew he could not let this become another memory that haunted him. Hours later, gray fog settled low across the city as they approached a modest shelter nestled between a thrift shop and an abandoned storefront. The sign above the door read, "Willow House, support for women and children." The inside was warm, filled with the aroma of soup and the soft murmur of whispered conversations. A volunteer led them down a hallway lined with doors. "We had a woman come in late last night," she whispered. Exhausted, half frozen. Wouldn't give her name at first. At the end of the hall, in a small common room, Ethan saw her. Emily. She sat on a worn couch hunched forward, her thin arms wrapped around herself. Her long, chestnut-brown hair hung in tangled strands around her shoulders, and her pale skin looked almost translucent under the soft lighting. She wore a faded gray hoodie that was a size too big, sleeves stained at the cuffs. In her lap lay a crumpled photograph, Lily at age 8, missing her 2 front teeth, smiling brightly at the camera. Emily stared at it as if it were the only thing keeping her tethered to the world. When she lifted her head and saw Lily, her breath caught. "Lily," she choked out, voice cracking like thin ice. Lily froze for a heartbeat, tears swelling, then suddenly she ran, nearly stumbling, straight into her mother's arms. Emily held her so tightly Ethan worried she might break. "I'm sorry," she sobbed into Lily's hair. "I'm so sorry, baby. I thought if I left you there he wouldn't follow. I thought I'd draw him away." Lily cried, words tumbling out between gasps. "Mom, we were so cold. I didn't know if you were coming back." Emily cupped her daughter's cheeks, kissing her forehead again and again. Then her gaze dropped to the small bundle in Ethan's arms. Ava. Her voice fractured into something raw and shaking. Ethan stepped forward, transferring the sleeping infant to Emily carefully. Ava stirred, but did not wake her tiny fist curling near her mother's chest. Emily collapsed against the couch, hugging both children, her tears falling onto Ava's blanket. Ethan stepped back to give them space. He felt Max press gently against his leg, sensing his emotions the way dogs like him always did. After several minutes of sobs and whispered reassurances, Lily finally looked up at Ethan. Her eyes brimmed with gratitude deeper than words. Ethan scratched the back of his neck awkwardly. "Well," he said with a crooked smile, "if your family is looking to adopt an extra veteran and a dog with a snoring problem, we're available." Emily let out a breathy laugh through her tears. Lily giggled, wiping her cheeks. Even Max puffed out a short huff as if contributing. For the first time since the storm began, the heavy knot in Ethan's chest loosened. Maybe he couldn't save everyone. But today, he had saved someone. Winter softened its grip on Minneapolis as the weeks slipped quietly by, the harsh bite of the storm fading into gentler breezes and lighter snowfalls. The city still wore its coat of white, but the world felt less hostile now, as if the sky itself was learning to breathe again. Inside the small wooden cabin at the edge of the historic district, life began to stitch itself together in ways none of them had expected. Ethan woke early every morning, long before the sun rose, out of habit more than necessity. Sleep still came in uneven scraps, sometimes 3 hours, sometimes not at all. The shadows of old battles followed him into the dark, the echoes of memories he wished he could bury. But when he stepped out onto the creaking porch with Max trotting beside him, the cold air felt different than before. Lighter. Less like an enemy waiting to strike, more like a reminder that he was still alive and moving forward. Max, now 5 years old and proudly thick-furred for winter, carried himself with a confident vigilance. The German shepherd's amber-brown eyes scanned the street each morning, tail swaying with the quiet authority of a guardian who finally had a place worth protecting. He'd always been disciplined, but something softer lived in him now, a joy that surfaced whenever he spotted Lily bounding outside in her oversized jacket or Ava squealing happily from Emily's arms. After helping Emily settle into the shelter weeks earlier, Ethan had found himself unable to let the small family go. So he decided to repair the cabin, the sagging porch, the broken railing, the cracked window panes, and turn it into something bigger than just a house. With the help of the local church and community centers, he sketched out a plan to create a safe place for veterans and families who had nowhere else to turn during the winter. He worked steadily, repairing beams, repainting walls, sealing drafts, patching holes. The work steadied him in ways he didn't fully understand. It gave his hands something to do other than tremble. It gave his mind tasks that kept ghosts at bay. It gave his heart purpose. During those early days of renovation, Ethan met Pastor Raymond Hayes, a man in his late 60s with a sturdy frame, warm brown skin, and silver hair cropped short. The pastor had calm, thoughtful eyes and a presence that reminded Ethan of a commander who led not with volume, but with unwavering steadiness. Raymond offered the first donations, blankets, canned food, sleeping bags, carried in with arms that still bore the strength of someone who had worked his whole life caring for others. He was joined by Sandra Liu, the coordinator at the community center, a petite woman in her early 50s, with short black hair streaked with gray sharp cheekbones and a smile warm enough to melt stubborn ice. Sandra had a brisk, no-nonsense energy. She organized volunteers like she was directing an orchestra, making sure everything had its place. Both offered help without hesitation, sensing what Ethan was trying to build long before he found the words to explain it. And slowly, the cabin began to transform. Fresh paint covered the fading mint-green cabinets. New insulation warmed the walls. The fireplace stones were scrubbed clean. The floors, once creaking like old bones, now felt firm beneath their feet. In the center of the newly restored front porch, Ethan hung a wooden sign he had carved by hand, each letter sanded until it felt smooth beneath his palms. Winter Haven, a home for second chances. The name felt right, like something his Aunt Margaret might have dreamed of, but never had the strength to begin. Emily returned to the cabin often sometimes, to help with cleaning, sometimes simply to let Ava nap on the couch, while she talked with Ethan about her plans. Emily had found part-time work at a local cafe. She wore her brown hair tied back, now her face retaining a hint of exhaustion but gaining something new as well, a spark of hope that made her eyes brighter than before. She was still thin, still healing, but she moved with a clearer sense of direction each day. Lily, now back in school, ran home every afternoon with the same burst of energy she'd once reserved only for fear. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, her ponytail bouncing her small boots, kicking up little sprays of snow as she sprinted down the street toward the cabin. Sometimes she burst through the door to announce how much math she had learned. Other days, she held up drawings she made during art class. Pictures of Max, Ethan, Emily, and Ava, standing together in front of a big wooden house. In every picture, the cabin looked warm, lights glowing in every window. And always, Max was drawn larger than everyone else because he's the boss of safety, Lily would explain. Ava grew stronger each day. The infant's soft, rosy cheeks filled out her little fists, grasped everything from blankets to Ethan's shirt sleeve. She would squeal whenever Max walked by, flapping her tiny arms as if trying to fly toward him. Max accepted his new role with quiet pride, padding over to sniff her gently lying beside her bassinet, raising his head protectively whenever she cried. Ethan found himself falling into a rhythm he never expected, a routine that felt oddly like family. He made breakfast for Lily when Emily worked early shifts. He changed Ava's blanket when Emily's hands were full. He walked Lily to school, Max trotting beside them like a soldier guarding royalty. And at night, when the cabin grew quiet and the embers in the fireplace dimmed, Ethan no longer felt fear tightening around his lungs. Instead, he felt a steady warmth he hadn't believed he deserved. One pale afternoon, as snowflakes drifted lazily from the sky, Ethan hammered a small plaque beneath the porch light. The plaque was simple, just sanded wood and carved letters, but to him it felt like the heart of everything he'd been trying to rebuild. It read, "For every child who once waited alone in the cold and every soldier who feared they'd run out of places to come home to." Lily stood behind him, Ava bundled in her arms, her breath puffing into the cold air. "Does that mean me and Ava too?" she asked softly. Ethan turned, resting his hand lightly on Max's head. "Not just you," he said, voice warm. "Anyone who walks through that door. This house isn't just mine, it's ours now." Lily swallowed a shy smile blooming on her face before she leaned gently into his side. Ava babbled at Max, reaching out to pat his ear. Max closed his eyes with patience only a loyal dog could possess. Snow continued falling around them, gentle and quiet like a promise whispered beneath the winter sky. Inside the old wooden cabin, warmth, laughter, and the solid heartbeat of a once-lost soldier turned protector filled every corner. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan realized the truth. He hadn't just survived the war. He had found his way home. In the quiet glow of that small wooden cabin, it became clear that miracles don't always arrive in flashes of light or thunder from the heavens. Sometimes they come softly through a stranger's kindness, a child's courage, a loyal dog's watchful eyes, or the unexpected chance to begin again. And in moments like these, we're reminded that God's grace rarely shouts. It whispers. It nudges. It guides our steps toward the people we're meant to meet and the places where healing waits. Maybe your own life feels like winter right now, cold, uncertain, or lonely. But just like Ethan, Lily, Emily, and little Ava discovered God often works through the ordinary days, turning broken places into havens, turning fear into belonging, and turning wandering hearts toward home. If this story touched your spirit even a little, I invite you to share it with someone who could use a reminder that God still moves in quiet ways. Leave a comment about where you're watching from, or share a prayer for someone who needs warmth this season. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel so these stories of hope, courage, and grace can continue to reach those who need them most. May God bless you, your family, and every step you take today and always.